Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Online Ethics Class number 3, Monday, March 23rd, 2020. Please read through the notes, obviously, before you watch the video, and this will make a lot more sense. Today we're dealing with what is called the Principle of Double Effect, or PDE for short. The principle of double effect, as number 1 in your note states, is also known as the indirect voluntary. The word indirect applies to the effects generated by the action. The word voluntary refers to the fact that you are performing, or someone is performing, the action voluntarily. The key to the principle of double effect is that we have to make sure that we're analyzing one action that has two effects. In that one action, we cannot separate the two effects. An easy example to use is what you've probably all experienced is you go into a bathroom, you turn on a switch, and both the light and the fan comes on. If you didn't want the fan on, you don't have a choice if you want the light on. On the other hand, sometimes there are two switches, one for the light and one for the fan. The principle of double effect is illustrated by the situation with one switch and two effects, both the light and the fan. So that's what we're looking for in the principle of double effect. I gave you several examples right at the very beginning. You apply for a job, you work in healthcare, you're a teacher. One action, you apply for a job, you get it, somebody else doesn't. Good effect, bad effect. You work in healthcare, you go to work, you get paid, that's a good effect, right? You get sick, that's a bad effect. One action, two effects, right? You're a teacher, you give a test, some students succeed, that's a good effect, some students fail, that's a bad effect. It's not going to happen in this class, by the way. Right? Okay, so another way to think about what's going on and with regard to why we need the principle of double effect is the problem of our cooperation in evil. Just as we can't guarantee that all results of our actions will be good, we also can't live life normally without cooperating in evil. There are different labels that we give to our cooperation in evil, and you can see those listed in number 8, A, B, and C. So our cooperation in evil could be material, indirect, and remote. Those three often go together, or usually go together. Or our cooperation could be formal, direct, or proximate. So here's an example. A company manufactures a space heater. The space heater is geared toward a certain economic clientele. It's relatively inexpensive, and so people who need a relatively inexpensive space heater are those who purchase it. However, there's a problem. In a certain number of cases, the space heater has been statistically demonstrated to tip over. In a certain number of cases where the space heater tips over, fuel spills out. In a certain number of cases where fuel spills out, a fire starts. In a certain number of cases where a fire starts, there is property damage. And in a certain number of cases, an ever-decreasing number of cases where a fire starts, there is not only property damage, but there is human death. So the executives of the company consider these statistical realities, spilling fuel, starting fires, property damage, human death, and they look at the numbers involved. And you might say that the people involved in the discussion might be people like the chief engineer, chief financial officer, chief administrative officer, chief operations officer, chief executive officer. And so they all need to think about what would happen if we re-engineered this particular product so that this defect was eliminated. And the conclusion could be that it could be re-engineered to eliminate this particular defect, On the other hand, it would price the product out of the range of the people who need this sort of product. There is liability. Now, the company does not just consist of those 4 or 5 executives or chiefs that I just named. The company also consists of those who work in the payroll department, other areas of accounting, those who work in production, those who work on the loading dock, and really even involved in this process could be the people who are working at the stores where the product is sold. Say the cashier at Walmart sees this space heater come through, she's scanning it, and he or she thinks, oh, well, this could be the space heater that eventually ends up causing someone's death. Now, surely it's clear, more or less from common sense, that the responsibility that rests with the executives is different than the responsibility that rests with those who work for the company or even who work in stores that sell the product. In those instances, if you're the payroll clerk, the loading dock individual, the cashier at Walmart, your cooperation in evil is still there. You're still handling the product. You're still involved in the company. But we would label your cooperation in that evil, in almost every case, as remote, indirect, material. The case of the executives is going to be different because they're involved, they're closer, they have responsibility, so they have more formal responsibility, they're directly involved, they're close to the situation. All right, so that's what's meant by cooperation in evil, and there are other aspects of that which we may get to at a later date. As we get into the principle of double effect, remember that in every action we were evaluating 3 elements. The element of what's being done, the act itself, the element of why it's being done, the intention, and the element of the rest of the circumstances. In the principle of double effect, we're going to focus on 2 of those circumstances. Namely, we're going to focus on the effects of the action, and we are going to focus on the notion of proportion. Now, be aware that even though we're focusing here on the notion of proportion, this is not the same as an ethical theory that would be solely focused on proportion. So the principle of double effect is an element of the theory of classical realism or natural law. Voluntarism, also known as consequentialism or proportionalism or utilitarianism, really has no use for the first 3 criteria. They're solely focused on the notion of proportion. Whereas what's happening here with the principle of double effect is we're taking the notion of proportion and putting it into context with the other 3 elements. All right, so now we're going to have some examples.